She was 8 months pregnant, standing at the edge of a cliff, and her husband was behind her, not to pull her back, not to protect her. He was there to push. And he did. What happened next defies every instinct you have about how stories like this end. Because she didn't fall to her death. She didn't lose the baby. She survived. The baby survived. But here's the part nobody talks about. The man who caught her. He wasn't supposed to be there. And the husband? He was already on his phone, walking away, checking to see if it was done. This is not a story about survival alone. This is a story about the darkest thing a human being can do to someone who trusted them completely, and the impossible chain of events that somehow turned it into something else. Stay with me, because before this is over, you're going to understand something about love, betrayal, and human evil that most people spend their whole lives refusing to look at. Her name was Sarah. And by every measure that the outside world uses to judge a life, hers looked perfect. She had a house in a quiet suburb, a car in the driveway, a husband who posted photos of them at restaurants with captions like "grateful every day." She was 8 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they'd already named. She'd already bought the crib, already painted the nursery a soft shade of blue. People at her baby shower said she was glowing. That word, glowing. It's the word people use when they don't know what's burning underneath. Her husband's name was Marcus. And Marcus was the kind of man who knew exactly how to be perceived. Charming at parties. Helpful to neighbors. The type who holds the door open and remembers your kid's name. But at home? At home, Marcus was something else entirely. It started small, the way it always does. A comment about how she'd spent money. A cold silence after she laughed too loudly at a dinner. Small corrections. Small punishments. The invisible architecture of control that gets built so slowly the person living inside it doesn't notice the walls going up. By the time Sarah realized she was trapped, she was already pregnant. And that changed everything for Marcus. Not in the way it should have. Not in the way a man who loves his wife changes when he finds out he's going to be a father. No. The pregnancy changed Marcus because it complicated his other life. The one Sarah didn't know about. There was another woman. There had been for nearly 2 years. And that woman, her name never fully released to the public, was also pregnant. Think about that. 2 pregnant women. 1 man. And a mortgage, a bank account, a social reputation all intertwined with the wife he'd already mentally walked away from. Marcus didn't want a divorce. Not because he loved Sarah, but because divorce was expensive. Divorce was public. Divorce meant lawyers who asked questions and judges who split assets and a whole paper trail of who did what that Marcus was not willing to create. So he started thinking about the other option. He didn't arrive at it overnight. This is important. This isn't a crime of passion. This is a crime of calculation, of spreadsheets and timing and risk assessment. He was an engineer by trade. He thought in systems. He looked at his life like a problem that needed a solution. And Sarah, to him, was the variable he needed to eliminate. He started researching hiking trails. Remote ones. Trails with elevation. With cliffs. With loose gravel and poor cell reception. And the kind of terrain where an accident could look like an accident. He told Sarah he wanted to take her on one last trip before the baby came. A baby moon, he called it. Something romantic. Something they'd remember. She cried when he suggested it. She thought he was finally becoming the man she'd always believed he could be. She packed her bag the night before with a smile on her face. The trail was called Creston Ridge. It sits about 40 miles outside the city, and if you've never been there, the way locals describe it is beautiful and unforgiving. The kind of place where the views are worth the climb but the edges have no mercy. The Park Service had posted signs. There were sections of the trail with sheer drops, 200-300 feet. Rocky canyon floor below. No guarrays. No rescue stations. No cameras. Marcus had driven the route twice before. Alone. Getting the geography right in his head like a man rehearsing lines before a performance. That morning he was calm. Sarah later said, in the police interviews, in the statement that went public, that she'd never seen him so calm. So present. He made her breakfast. He held her hand on the drive out. He played her favorite album through the car speakers and sang along, badly, and she laughed. She laughed. And somewhere behind those calm eyes, he was running the checklist. They parked at the trailhead at 9:47 a.m. A detail we know because a ranger station camera caught the car. Just the car. No faces. But the timestamp would later become critical. They hiked for about an hour and 40 minutes. Sarah was 8 months pregnant. She was slow. She was careful. And Marcus was patient with her in a way that should have been a red flag but wasn't, because she wanted so badly to believe in this version of him. This is one of the cruelest parts of calculated abuse. It mimics love right at the moment it's preparing the kill. They reached the outcropping Marcus had scouted, a wide, flat ledge with a sweeping view of the valley below. It was genuinely beautiful. Sarah took out her phone and took a photo. The photo was recovered later. In it, she's smiling, hand on her belly, valley spread out golden behind her. It was the last photo taken before he pushed her. Here's what the prosecution argued happened next, based on forensic analysis of the scene, Sarah's own account, and witness testimony that came from a source no one expected. Marcus told her to stand closer to the edge, to get a better angle for the photo. She hesitated. She said later she felt something shift, something cold, something that she couldn't name. A wife's intuition. A body's warning system that the mind overrides because it doesn't want to be right. She stepped closer. And Marcus put both hands on her back. And he pushed. Not a shove. Not a stumble. A deliberate, two-handed push. Full force. The kind of push that says I have decided this. She went over the edge. Now, I need you to understand the physics of what was happening here, because this is where the story breaks open in a way that you are not ready for. The cliff face at that section wasn't a straight vertical drop. It was angled. Slightly. Maybe 15, 20 degrees off true vertical. Which meant when she went over, she didn't drop straight down like a stone. She slid. Partly fell, partly slid along a rough rock face, grabbing at nothing. 8 months pregnant. The world spinning in every direction at once. She was screaming. She said she remembered screaming not for herself, but for the baby. That her first thought wasn't I'm going to die. It was not him, not him, not him. And then something grabbed her. A hand. One hand. On her wrist. Gripping so hard it left bruises that were still visible 3 weeks later. She stopped. Not at the bottom. Not on the canyon floor. Partway down. Caught on a narrow ledge she couldn't see from above. Held in place by a man who was not supposed to be on that trail at all. His name was Daniel Cho. A 34-year-old off-duty paramedic from the city, who had taken a personal day and driven out to Creston Ridge alone because, as he told it later, he just needed to think. He'd been going through something of his own. We'll come back to that, because it matters more than you'd expect. Daniel had been hiking the lower section of the trail, below the outcropping, in a spot that no casual hiker would ever end up at because it required a scramble off the main path down a secondary route that Daniel only knew about from a hiking forum post he'd read 2 years earlier, and somehow still remembered. Of all the days, of all the trails, of all the people, he heard the scream before he saw her. He said in interviews that he heard it, and his paramedic brain just switched on. No hesitation. He was already moving before he understood what he was moving toward. He looked up, saw a figure falling and sliding along the cliff face, and positioned himself on the ledge he was standing on. A ledge barely wide enough for 2 people, and reached out, and caught her wrist. He caught an 8-month pregnant woman falling off a cliff with one hand on a ledge 200 feet in the air. He said later that he doesn't remember feeling the weight. That adrenaline rewrote the moment so completely that he only understood what had happened afterward. When his shoulder was in agony and his legs were shaking, and Sarah was lying half on the ledge and half against the cliff face, and they were both completely silent for a moment. Just breathing. Just alive. He looked at her belly and said the only thing his brain could produce. Is the baby okay? She put a hand on her stomach. And the baby kicked. Hard. As if to say I'm here. I'm still here. Daniel Cho started crying. He's not embarrassed about that. He told the story to a journalist 6 months later, and he said, I just completely fell apart right there on that ledge. I don't know why. I think something just broke open in me. But here's the open loop I need you to hold on to. Why was Daniel there? Because I told you it matters. And it does. But we're not there yet. First, let's talk about Marcus. Because while Daniel Cho was on a cliff ledge keeping 2 lives in this world, Marcus was walking back down the trail. Calmly. He had his phone out. He was composing a text. To the other woman. 3 words. It's done. Call me. He sent it at 11:34 a.m. He had not looked back over the edge. He had not waited to confirm. He was, and this is the assessment of the forensic psychologist who testified at trial, so certain of the outcome that confirmation felt unnecessary. He reached the parking lot, sat in the car, waited a few minutes, then drove to a gas station 6 miles away and bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips and paid in cash, establishing a timestamp and location that he intended to use as an alibi anchor. He was constructing a story in real time. The story was going to be, they argued, she slipped, he panicked, he ran for help, he's devastated. He had even, investigators later discovered, Googled grief counseling after accident, the week before the trip. He was going to perform grief. He was ready. What he was not ready for was his phone ringing at 12:17 p.m. A number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. But he did. And the voice on the other end was a park ranger named Officer Tessa Williams, who told him that his wife had survived a fall at Creston Ridge, was being airlifted to St. Michael's Medical Center, and that he should come immediately. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. For seconds where Marcus said nothing. For seconds where the story he had built collapsed from the inside. She's alive. He actually said that. Out loud. To the park ranger. She noted it. She wrote it down. She flagged it immediately with her supervisor. She's alive. Not oh thank God. Not I'll be right there. Not is she okay? Is the baby okay? She's alive? Like a question. Like a calculation failing. The investigation moved fast. Faster than Marcus expected. Which means he expected it to move at all. Which means some part of him knew that survive changed everything. A death with no witnesses is a tragedy. A survival with a witness is something else. And Daniel Cho was a very good witness. He was a paramedic. He was trained in precise observation. He had stayed on that ledge with Sarah for 45 minutes. Keeping her calm, monitoring her vitals by feel and instinct, keeping her still because moving a fall victim on a narrow mountain ledge without equipment is how you lose them. Until the helicopter arrived. 45 minutes. With one arm that was partially dislocated from the catch, which he didn't mention to anyone until Sarah was safely in the helicopter, and a ranger asked him why his arm was hanging wrong. In those 45 minutes, Sarah talked. People talk when they think they might die. They say the things they've been holding. She told Daniel what happened. She told him about the hands on her back. She told him it wasn't an accident. She told him his name. Daniel remembered every word. And then he told it to investigators with the precise, clinical clarity of someone who has spent a decade documenting the worst moments of people's lives in official reports. Marcus was arrested at the hospital. He had shown up, which psychologists say, was both calculated and delusional. He believed he could still manage this, that he could perform the worried husband well enough to create doubt. He walked into that hospital with flowers. Flowers. The nurses who saw him walk in with flowers while his wife was in emergency surgery later said it was the most disturbing thing they'd ever seen in a hospital hallway. The arrest happened in the corridor outside the ICU. In front of nurses. In front of other visitors. In front of a man who had been waiting to hear news about his mother, and instead watched a man in a button-down shirt get handcuffed 15 feet from the maternity ward. Marcus didn't fight it. He went quiet. The performance shut off like a light switch. The trial was swift by legal standards, 14 months from arrest to conviction. The prosecution had a paramedic witness with perfect recall, physical evidence of a deliberate two-handed push force based on the angle and velocity of the fall trajectory, text messages, search history, the mistress's testimony, and the 4-second pause on a recorded phone call where Marcus said she's alive like a man whose plan had just failed. The defense argued it was an accident. That she lost her footing. That Marcus was in shock on the phone. That the text message had been misinterpreted. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 12 minutes. Guilty. Attempted murder. Attempted murder of an unborn child. Premeditated. He was sentenced to 41 years. He will be 76 years old if he ever walks out. Sarah was in the courtroom for the sentencing. She came in a wheelchair. Her injuries from the fall had required 3 surgeries and 7 months of physical therapy. She held her son in her lap. The boy they'd already named. She didn't change his name. People asked her about that later. She said she'd named him for herself. For what she wanted him to be. The name was hers before it was ever Marcus's, and she wasn't giving it back. Marcus looked at her once during the sentencing. Just once. And she looked back. And then she looked down at her son. And that was the whole story in a single moment. But we haven't talked about Daniel yet. We haven't talked about why he was there. And I told you it matters. So here it is. Daniel Cho had taken a personal day from work because he was considering not going back. Not to that job. Not to any job. He'd been struggling with something he hadn't told anyone. A slow collapse after years of absorbing other people's worst moments. Car accidents, overdoses, the faces of people who didn't make it. Paramedics carry weight that has no official name. Weight that doesn't show up on a scan but shows up everywhere else. Sleeplessness. Disconnection. The feeling that the world is made of glass and you're the only one who can see through it. He had gotten in his car that morning with no specific destination. He ended up at Creston Ridge because he'd been there once as a teenager, and he remembered it as a place where things felt quiet and large and real in a way that was hard to find. He needed to decide something about his life. And then a woman fell off a cliff above him. And his hands reached out before his mind could negotiate. He told a journalist, "I've thought about this a lot. More than I can explain. I went there to think about whether any of it mattered. Whether what I did every day added up to anything. Whether I was just absorbing damage or actually changing something. And then that happened. I don't have a clean answer for what it means. I don't believe in things being arranged. But I also can't make it make sense any other way. I was exactly where I needed to be. My arm was exactly long enough. The ledge was exactly wide enough. If I'd taken a different trail. If I'd gone home the night before like I almost did. If I'd walked 5 minutes slower." He paused in the interview. "She named the baby. She sent me a photo. I look at it sometimes when the job gets heavy." He went back to work. He's still a paramedic. There's a version of this story that ends at the bottom of a canyon. Most of the stories like this one do. They end in a search party and a press conference and a candlelight vigil and a GoFundMe for the funeral that the community pours money into and then forgets about 6 weeks later. They end in a cold case file when the evidence is thin and a broken family, and a child who grows up knowing only a photograph. That version of this story was the version Marcus planned. He planned it with search history and scouted trails and alibi timestamps and flowers already purchased and grief counseling already Googled. He planned it the way you plan a business trip. A man who looked at his pregnant wife and saw a problem to be solved. I want to sit in the weight of that for a moment. Because here's what this story actually is, underneath the drama and the cliffside and the impossibility of the catch. It's a story about how well evil can hide. Marcus did not look like this. He looked like the good husband at the dinner party. He looked like the man who remembered your kid's name. He sang along badly to the radio and she laughed, and none of the people at the baby shower could have picked him out of a lineup of monsters, because monsters don't come labeled. They come offering breakfast. They come holding your hand on the drive. They come wearing the face of the person you married. And the terrifying, unresolvable truth is that we don't have a reliable way to see through it. Not in time. Not always. Sarah had intuition. That cold feeling at the cliff edge. But intuition is easily overwritten by hope. By the desire to believe in the version of someone you fell in love with. This is not a story about her being naive. Don't do that. Recognizing manipulation while you're inside it is like trying to read a page you're printed on. The architecture is invisible from the inside. But here's the other thing this story is. It's a story about someone being exactly where they needed to be. Daniel Cho drove to a trail because he was falling apart. Because he needed to know whether what he did mattered. And the answer came at him at full velocity from 200 feet up, before he even finished forming the question. I'm not saying the universe arranged it. I'm not selling you anything mystical. But I am saying this. Daniel Cho did not hesitate. Years of training, years of absorbing damage, Years of showing up to other people's worst moments. All of it collapsed into a single reflex. His arm went out. His hand gripped. The years of showing up were the catch. You don't reach out like that without the long discipline of reaching out. You don't save a life in a single second without having spent years preparing to save lives in single seconds. Whatever Daniel Cho thought he was doing with his life, it was never wasted. Not one day of it. And Sarah. Sarah rebuilt. 3 surgeries. 7 months of physical therapy. A divorce that was technically unnecessary, because you can't be married to someone serving 41 years for trying to kill you, but the legal paperwork still had to be filed. A new apartment. A therapist she describes as annoyingly good at her job. She went back to work 18 months after the incident. She started a support group. Not a formal organization, just a small gathering of women in similar situations, in a church hall on Thursday evenings. She doesn't talk publicly about it much. She's protective of the space. Her son. He is 4 years old as of the time of this script. She posted one photo on the anniversary of the incident. A photo of him running through a park with his arms out like he's pretending to fly. The caption was 2 words. Still here. There are stories we hear about and move past quickly. File them under terrible things that happen to other people and keep scrolling. Don't do that with this one. Not because it's entertainment, but because the thing that almost ended Sarah's life, the thing that makes Marcus possible, is the gap between how people present and who they actually are. And that gap is everywhere. It is in every relationship where control is normalized. Every dynamic where love is used as a leash. The people who survive these stories usually survive because someone was paying attention. A ranger who noticed a timestamp. A paramedic who hadn't gone home yet. A jury who listened to 4 seconds of silence on a phone call. Paying attention matters. If something in this story felt familiar, not the cliff, not the drama, but the smaller architecture of it. The control. The isolation. The slow disappearance of yourself inside someone else's version of you. Talk to someone. Not because I'm required to say that. Because Sarah almost didn't get the chance to. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it. Not for the algorithm. Because the person it reaches might need to see that survival is possible. That someone can be exactly where they need to be. And if you're still here from the beginning, from the first 3 sentences, thank you for staying. There's more where this came from. Every story on this channel is chosen because it pulls something true out of the dark and forces you to look at it. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. We'll be back.